After I did my time plus a couple extra months, hopped out and started long capture and want to really just like bridge this gap between really innovative technologies and cool tech startups and all this with the funding and customers and help them kind of walk that whole path.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening. Today I'm speaking with Russell Long, founder and CEO of Long Capture, the company connecting technology innovators with government contract opportunities. Russell, thanks for chatting with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really excited.
No, this is great. It's going to be awesome. So first of all, kick things off. Can you share a little bit about, background and what, led you up to, or led the opportunity to start Long Capture?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an Okie. Came out to Colorado Springs the first time to the Air Force Academy, like you. So after graduating, I was a contracting officer for about 5.5 years and just saw a lot of different small businesses. Almost everything I did was a small business set aside. So a lot of companies come in, they do site visits, help us kind of figure out like what we needed to buy, and then we'd run the solicitation and they'd lose because they didn't understand that we packaged it into something like lowest price, technically acceptable. And they'd pitch us a really great solution, but they'd be a higher price and they'd lose and get really frustrated. I would have companies, again, small businesses calling me because an invoice had been stuck in wide area workflow for months and they're worried about making payroll. And so there's just so much opportunity and funding and set asides and things to like help small businesses and tech startups and everything like that. But very just frustrating, convoluted. Companies get a little bit of trouble just trying to figure out like how to actually access and do everything. So, after I did my time plus a couple extra months, hopped out and started long capture and want to really just like bridge this gap between really innovative technologies and cool tech startups and all this with the funding and customers and help them kind of walk that whole path.
Oh, it's fantastic. And way to take that skill set you learned in the Air Force and move it to the commercial side. So the Air Force has done a lot. Well, the entire DoD has done a lot to try to entice small businesses, small business set aside, designation of small business veteran owned, women owned, to really bring, help drive business there. Do you think it's working?
Wow, great question. And kind of going back to when I got out, end of 2017, rolling into 2018, the first year it was really hard to get traction. But about 6 months out, like in hindsight, I feel incredibly lucky because AFWERX started their whole experiment and starting the open topic SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research contracts. And all of a sudden, there was this front door open opportunity to pull in a lot of these venture capital backed, investment backed tech startups and get them into you have this front door and this on ramp. And especially in those early years, like we could, within like 5-6 months, we could be to $1 million+ contracts. And that's slowed down a lot. It got a lot more rigid and structured. It is more predictable. But to actually get back to answering your question, is it working? I have seen just thousands of tech companies that, previous to 5-6 years ago would have no interest whatsoever in working with the Department of Defense. But because of programs like AFWERX and a bunch of others that we can get into that have some matching programs and different incentives and things like that, there's a huge influx in interest. Now, the next challenge is crossing the valley of death. Okay, great. We got thousands of companies in. They got some couple million in funding through the SBIR program and a couple other pathways. Now it's like, how do we actually get them through into the program of record and making sure their tech is reaching scale? That is not working great. But again, that's where we focus a lot of our energy. And I will say, like, what I see as the second wave of innovation are things like AppFit, Rapid Innovation Fund, getting re-upped after being dead for like 5-6 years, whatever it might be. So I see a ton of focus and funding and support actually from Congress on down to help bridge and cross this valley of death. So that's where we've got all thousands of companies in the door, some initial traction, a lot of frustration and like trying to get to that next level. But I do see, again, that's where there's a ton of new opportunity and focus. And so I hope over the next couple of years, we'll see those programs get utilized and leveraged, and there'll be more of a success story there than there is currently.
Yeah, I guess the one I've seen is Anduril. They finally, with the CCA competition, it looks like finally a small business has made that leap. It
Yeah.
started small and, it wasn't one of the primes for a major program. So that is a challenge. So how do you at Long Capture, bridge that gap between the innovative technology and I'll say startups? I imagine you also work with non-startups, so you can share.
Like startups and scale ups. Again, a lot of them, I'd say majority have been investment backed, but others are bootstrapping or been around for a couple of years, or some have been kind of in the government side for a while and they want to figure out again how do you actually scale and cross this valley of death and get to really big contract awards. But the way we do it is we're essentially an outsourced federal team. For some of our clients, like we are the federal team. For others, we're just augmenting and supporting, like, hey, we're going to split targets and outreach. Like, you're going to go to Navy, we're going to go to Space Force and SOCOM or Army and kind of divvy it up that way. But the way I've structured the team is, you need proposal no matter what the contract process or whatever's going to happen. There's always going to be a request for proposal type process, and compliance and writing a good proposal is always going to be a big piece of that. So I see a lot of companies kind of jump in and do that piece. I see a lot of companies start with or maybe hire like retired colonels or generals or pick a veteran up or whatever, but start with business development. And it is really important for companies to, again, like figure out where that tech fits and start making relationships. But the final piece, so we have our proposal team, we have our business development team. I think most important, and that what most people miss is capture. That's long capture. Ta-da. So with the capture focus, it's like how do we take a relationship through the acquisition process, through the thousands of pages of regulations and the bureaucracy and all the paperwork, and actually move it towards funding and getting towards a couple different funding like items or pots of money to the actual contract award and structuring that contract in a way that's favorable. Again, shaping it towards sole source. Almost everything that we do is on a sole source or non-competitive basis. So that's, again, how we structure the team. We've got capture, driving that strategy, doing some of the outreach, business development, helping go target new relationships if they're out of network, and then proposal, helping with take almost all of that proposal work as much as we can off the client's plate. So that's how we structured it.
Okay. And I would like to come back to that on, the relationship piece, but
Yeah.
can you talk like a startup company that was building widget X? Pretty cool. How would you walk them? What would kind of be your game plan to get them through a full government contracted, across the valley of death? Can you give just a quick timeline or kind of what that would look like in your process?
Absolutely. And I'm excited because like we've been working on a lot of content around like a framework we're going to start talking about. So I guess you heard it here first, folks.
Here we go.
Traction, momentum, and then scale. So on the traction side, there's a couple entry points. So we talked about phase 1s and 2s, SBIRs through AFWERX open topics. So that's often a great door for especially investment-backed or just companies that have a little bit of commercial revenue already. That's the kind of thing they're looking for. So come in through a phase 1, get a little bit of funding, move into phase 2, you're in the $1 to $2 million.
What does phase 1 look like? What is kind of the goal of each of these phases, if you will?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So let's talk some concrete details. So they come to me, they say, "Hey, I've got this widget. I'm interested in, trying to bring it to the Air Force. I think there's a use case and something really interesting there." Well, AFWERX has a phase 1 round in August to September. So we'd reach out, see if we can find some interested end users. So the actual operators or warfighters that would be using that widget to start getting their feedback of like, yeah, this is interesting, and get some of that feedback as we roll into actually building that proposal for phase 1. So phase 1, like in the good old days, you were able to do a lot of your, again, this is open topic, AFWERX. You were able to do a lot of your customer discovery during that phase 1. There's a lot of other SBIR types, and a lot of that's more about doing a feasibility analysis, like way more into the research and white paper, that kind of stuff. But again, like this great entry point for a lot of these different tech companies is like, here's your phase 1, like go figure out what tweaks you need to make to your commercial tech to make this a really scalable or impactful solution to the military, and especially Air Force and Space Force, because they're the ones running and funding this specific program that I'm talking about. So we start there. They get a phase 1 by November, rolling into next year, probably March, April timeframe, just off the cuff. There's a chance for a follow-on phase 2. And there's some other out of cycle direct to phase 2 rounds. So between now and let's say this time next year, they should have 3+ opportunities at a phase 2. of 1.25 million is kind of where they've been the last couple of rounds. And that money is research and development. They like to say, hey, it's non-dilutive. And what a lot of companies use it for is, hey, I got a cool software package, but I need to get on network. So there's an authority to operate this whole process and the hoops you got to jump through in order to get your solution, your software on network. Or it might be, hey, this hardware works in California in a park, but is it going to work downrange in a deployed environment so they can harden that hardware solution to make it work in a deployed environment? So that's what that kind of funding is for. From there, there's just a ton. This is again, like we hit on the second wave of innovation. There's TACFI, StratFi, there's acronyms there, AppFit. A lot of these programs, like we have, again, free tool pages on our website that talk about funding amounts, like your technology readiness level for it. Are you eligible for it? Things like that. So I know I'm brushing over a lot of acronyms and things really quick. If you go to our website, longcapture.com, there's some really great breakdowns that you can just see for free. But all that to say is like, all right, we've got, 1 to 3, maybe 5 million if we've won a couple of these different phase twos. But now we're getting into some of the matching programs that anywhere from 2 million to 15 million. AppFits 10 million to 50 million. There's processes to go after fallout money. And that can be anywhere from $25,000 to 8 million, depending on some different factors. But all that to say is like there's a lot of these different funding sources. The hard part's like, figuring out where they are, what the processes are, because it's different from SBIR, which was a whole different game that you just had to learn and go through. But the main point I want to get at, though, is like that's where you start to get momentum. You're starting to get into some of these other funding sources, some of these matching pieces. So you move from like that initial traction of phase 1 and 2. Now you're getting into some of these bigger dollars and other funding sources. That's where you get momentum. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see companies make is they blow their momentum. So to me, it's like a train going uphill and they aren't reaching out to the right customers. So program offices, people with the big dollars, people that are going through the PPBE, the budgetary process that the Department of Defense follows to get money 3 to 5 years down the road and figuring out how to fill that gap of that 3 to 5 years before the big dollars show up from Congress and appropriations. So momentum is like, hey, you can get 10, 20, $50 million in this kind of runway and funding while you're working on these bigger kind of program of record type plays to get there. And so again, what I was saying is like a lot of companies lose that momentum. Like let's say they get a $15 million StratFi and they get to the end of it and they never talk to someone outside of the research lab. The research lab 99% of the time is not going to be your customer. They're not going to be that program office that's buying it at scale for the enterprise. And so you've missed out on $15, $20 million in runway, 2, 3, 4 years of, again, time to be building the relationships and moving towards that transition customer. And so they get to the end of it and they're like, great, now who do I talk to for phase 3? Who do I talk to for the next contract? And they have signed themselves up for a 12, 18, 24-month gap that they should have been working previously. So that makes sense. So like we got to go traction. And the earlier you identify that transition customer and tie them into phase 1s and 2s and TACFI, StratFis and AppFits and all these other things, the more likely you're actually going to be to keep using that momentum and keep getting more and actually reach scale at the top. Clear as mud.
No, I mean, that makes sense. And it's navigating that is super challenging. But how do you feel, so you've got your teams built up to do this.
Yeah.
I've got widget X or capability or, software to do something. In order to, really make that understandable through the end client and all these relationships, how are your folks becoming really the technology experts or the experts in that system and then creating that? And then they have multiple deals, like getting those relationships going. Is that a challenge? Or is it more just, who to call at the right time, you call them and that you've already got that relationship established? Or are you creating new relationships with the customer to tie that together? It seems like that would be a challenging thing to do.
Yeah, so I will say we spend a lot of time both in our proposals and in prepping our message and one-pagers and emails and things that are going out to government customers. We spend a lot of time getting out of the technical jargon and actually turning it into like, what's the value? So most founders, they love their tech. A lot of times they're technical founders and they like figured out these crazy algorithms or these insane like ways to print who knows what. And so they are so focused on like the patents and the tech and like the nitty-gritty details of how that's different that they're not communicating that this can save lives. This can save 10 man hours per airman per, finance officer, security forces, like whatever it might be. So they have a really hard time communicating that kind of impact. And especially with the operator, where you need to, that's kind of your product market fit. They're the ones going to be using the tech. They don't really give a shit how it works. So you got to be able to communicate like this is how it provides value to you, the warfighter, how it's going to save your life, how it's going to save you time or money or whatever it might be. So actually us having a little less technical expertise and being able to turn that into how do we communicate that clearly and that impact and that story, that's really, really valuable. Now we do have to understand the tech and sometimes communicate how that technology is different from the current one that they're using. Or oftentimes, like truly, like once we get that interest, once we get some of that traction, we'll bring them in to the conversation so that then the client can do the really deep dive. If we actually get to a scientist that knows what the heck they're talking about, which might be more difficult to find than you might expect. Even in the research labs, like they've got deep expertise, but it's tangential or in a different field.
So you basically just go on a headhunting mission. You've got the mission, you determine value for this capability set, and then within the government who might be interested in that, and you start like mini campaigns for these different organizations.
Yes.
To see if one will bite.
Yeah, exactly. Get it in front of a lot of different, we've got a huge list of people who've worked with us before and all the different ways that they've worked with us, whether it's letters of support or funding a phase 3, any of these different aspects. So starting with that, but then also coming up with what's the North Star? Like what's the 3 to 5 year like transition partner and who is that? And sometimes they're a network and sometimes they're not. And then we turn the team loose to go do targeted outreach and see, yes or no, like this is actually the office that would be interested in it. Or sometimes it's no, but go talk to this office and then we'll get a warm introduction that way. But yeah, a lot of just outreach and seeing kind of what sticks.
So the program offices, have they accepted, you speaking on behalf of customers? And like, is that relationship through all the AFWorks accepted, or like, go away, you're another contractor that's a contractor for someone else? Like, or is that really, have they bought into?
That's great question. So it depends. A lot of them are, but it sometimes, we kind of become a known quantity and we cut out a little bit of work because we'll come to them with like, hey, here's 3 or 4 one-pagers that you might be interested in. That way they're not having demos with 3 or 4 different companies and blowing a couple hours that way. So some customers definitely recognize and appreciate that. And every once in a while there's one that's like, I don't want to talk to you, I want to talk to the company. It's like, okay, well, now they get to talk to the company. So yeah, it for the most part though, it's been very receptive. And again, going back to like AFWorks and these bigger pushes and DIU, Defense Innovation Unit, there's just been so many different innovation pushes. And I've seen a huge uptick in government getting out of the office and coming to conferences and being encouraged or even kicked out of the office and forced to go and have communication with industry. So I really feel like the last 5-6 years that I've been doing this, I've seen that huge kind of openness and communication start to happen that wasn't happening before. So I hope to see that trend continue. And everything I've seen so far, it seems to be on an upward trend. So that's made life much easier.
Yeah.
A lot more exciting to just be able to have a conversation with the customer.
No, it is. And the small businesses, that's where the real innovation's happening.
Yeah, I think anymore, most of the primes have resigned themselves to just acquiring companies once they innovate. We'll just buy them once they get big enough and have enough traction.
The big integrators, a couple big ideas, but not the true innovation. So companies that you've helped, or maybe not helped, tried to help, what are their biggest challenges? If someone comes to you and is like, all right, I've got this, the Air Force is going to pay me $1 billion, or the Navy or whatever, for this thing. What are the biggest challenges you've seen with small businesses that engage with you?
So I'd say focus, or I'll pull on this thread first. So a lot of companies really overvalue relationships. And there's like, oh, I had a couple great demos, had a couple great conversations. They really want to work with us. And they don't understand there's a 9, 12, 18-month contracting process where the contracting officer's job and how they get graded and how they get judged by their leadership is forcing them to go and compete it typically. And so a lot of companies will think they're on the precipice of getting a contract, or like, oh, we got this amazing relationship, but this relationship like doesn't know the process to go and ask for funding or get that funding, and then they don't know the process to work it through contracting and actually get what they want. Because again, like the incentive and the training, the regulations, for our part, I think it's 6. It's all about getting competition. And so like they're fighting all these forces. So companies are like, yeah, like, oh man, I'm gonna get $3 million in like 2 months. And then it's like, wow, we are like round zero, like just starting kind of through the process. And so that has been a huge challenge, and like understanding that big kind of eye opener for a lot of companies. You're like, why isn't this awarded yet? I thought we are going to have it within a month or two. So that's a big one. And then focus.
What advice would you give to entrepreneurs who are looking to succeed in the space?
So one thing I think entrepreneurs need to decide is if they're going to be a commercial first company or defense first company. So a lot of really successful dual use companies, they are successful because they spent a lot of time and investment. They went to market on the commercial side, start generating a lot of revenue and traction that way. And then they've got kind of that roadmap, kind of that path. They've got the team assembled, that they're on a good trajectory there. Then they can actually spend the time, money, resources, and understand like it can be a longer sales cycle with the Department of Defense. But then, again, they can come in prepared. Where I've seen a lot of companies fail is like off the bat. I mean, I'm an overly ambitious and optimistic founder. Like I get it. I try to do too much at once, but they'll start the company and like try and do defense and commercial. And it's like, well, there's, cybersecurity requirements. There's facility clearances. There's, again, longer sales cycles, and they might want to, if you need to get on network, there's the ATO process I mentioned earlier. So like there's different challenges in going to market and scaling with the defense customer than the commercial side, and that's where they get kind of spread too thin. Now, if you've got maybe a billionaire co-founder, you might be all right and have some money and resources, but for most of us, we're not in that situation. And the other piece is like, okay, I do want to be defense first, which honestly, like Anduril, Palantir, some of those players have been a little bit more of like a defense first focus of like, hey, I specifically want to go after and scale within defense and pour time, money, resources, teams into making that happen. And then can turn around and say, all right, great. Now I've got this piece figured out and I've built this really great software capability or whatever. Let's see if I can take some of it over to commercial. So that's the biggest piece, is like deciding like where you want to focus and what you want to do first. And then build your strategy around that, not try and do too many things at once.
Yeah. I mean, it is attractive. You can see how, hey, you go get, 1.25 million, then you can get 5 or 10, like, oh, I could fund my whole company and my whole journey.
Yeah. And somehow
through that.
Yeah.
But generally it's going to start driving your roadmap. You get divergence from your actual vision. So you can definitely see the challenges and, companies making sure that they have that set before they get too far down the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
So from, regulatory, you mentioned some of them are like, you've got compliance mandates, you've got cybersecurity. How do you think that's affecting the innovation process within defense?
So I think the biggest question mark, and in other conversations that we've had between our teams, like, I think just the biggest question mark that companies don't understand is like, when do they have to start taking some of these different cybersecurity and compliance things serious? And a lot of the noise and information that's going on out in the world a lot of it's kind of fear mongering, like, oh, you're going to get in trouble. Like, you need to do this, you need to do it now, rather than like, hey, real talk, like once you hit X milestone, you need to really start focusing on cybersecurity or facilities clearance or any of this number of other kind of compliance pieces. I was thinking cost accounting, but try and avoid that like the plague, in my opinion. So so just like getting a like real insight of like how serious are some of these mandates? When do they really start kicking in? When do the audits and like checks and balances start actually happening? And so that like as a founder, as a business owner, I can make a calculated, risk assessment of like, okay, I don't want to take risk on X, Y, and Z. I'll do it now. Or like, again, maybe I'll be commercial first. Let's go to market, do all that first, and then come back and say, all right, let's get a phase one. Let's get a phase 1 and 2. Okay, there's something there. We've got interested customers. Now I'm going to really put the time, money, resources into building out this compliance and cybersecurity posture and like all these different things that will prep them for scale to be like a real vendor in this ecosystem. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just managing risk and timing and when there are actually going to be teeth on these things that make it painful if you don't do it.
Yes.
So let's talk a little about you guys. I mean, to share some of your successes, you've been around for a while, how many folks have you crossed the valley of death with? What, how many contracts, like just give me some of your stats, if you will.
Yeah. So my proposal team like went back and ran some analysis, and a big piece of it is it takes time. And like going back to our clients that we worked with in 2019 and 2020 and started setting them off on this path and finding their customers and kind of starting to run some of these sole source plays, what we've seen is I think we're at like around 24% that have transitioned to sole source like phase threes. And the average amount of those being close to, I want to say $5 million. I was reading a Defense Innovation Board like report on the Valley of Death and crossing. And I think it was like maybe only 12 to 16% of companies ever actually transition to a phase three. And then beyond that, sorry, I don't have it offhand, but there's a chunk, like majority of those that actually do. So smaller percentage actually transition. And then of that number, very few of those are getting larger contracts than the phase twos. So the return on investment isn't there in most cases. So we're seeing average phase three timeline for our past clients being around 24 months. And again, being around a $5 million phase three.
Is that 24 months from phase
First
two, 24?
phase one, like first phase one contract award.
Okay.
To then phase three. Some we've done in a couple of months. That's some kind of a fluke, just right time, right place, talking to the right people, standing up a new initiative, funding comes down. Sometimes it's like hard fought, 28, 36 months. But the thing is, like, along the way, like, let's say it takes 24 months or even 48, like, we can pick up millions and sometimes even tens of millions through these other programs before we're getting to a phase three. But overall, like, what's really exciting to me, I'm really excited to come out with some of these case studies and announcements later this year. But like, saw a company we worked with back in 2019, 2020, BrainGoo, like we won them their first like 14, 15 million, their first phase three. Now, like 3-4 years later, with some of those customers or again, some of those playbooks, now getting to $125 million phase threes. There's some clients we're working with now. We started with them back in 2019. In both cases, they took a break from us for a year or two, came back because they started getting some traction or they started getting some smaller phase threes. We're like, how do we scale this? So a couple of like $100 million range phase threes that are in the works. And again, hopefully crossing the finish line later. But I think in total, it's been a while since we tallied like 70 million or so in like phase three awards. And then again, like we can get some of these across the finish line, then that doubles, triples, quadruples some of the numbers that we've done so far. So it takes
great.
time, but the final note being like it's working, and we're starting to see so many more companies have those case studies of like really reaching scale and getting to the 50 and 100 and $200 million contract awards.
So what is Long Capture's secret sauce? So you're not the only company or contractor consultant that does this, but you have been successful. Why are you different?
We have a relentless drive to always improve. So if we look at one of our values is innovation through constant iteration. And so we're always looking for ways to refine our services, refine our processes and training and all of those different aspects. So if we look at ourselves a year ago, we're pretty different. If you look at us 4 years ago, like night and day. we used to be like, I got my start slinging phase ones into proposals back in the day. And I knew that this, like, crossing the valley of death, like, huge potential for like massive awards and a huge, just complicated problem that very few have like truly focused on. So like we have focused on that whole transition pathway and that transition journey and making it repeatable and scalable. And then always questioning, okay, like what are the pain points for clients? What are the pain points in our demos and our presentations and things with our government customers? And how do we make that a little bit better? How do we make it a little bit better? And trying different things out. So that's been, I think, the biggest piece is day to day doesn't look a whole lot different, but over that longer time horizon, like, whew, very, very different.
Yeah, I think also the focus on that transition, because there are a lot of phase one, phase twos,
Yes.
but really focusing on that transition gives you guys and to be able to solve that, repeatable and scalable.
A little scalable. Yep.
That's big. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, looking ahead, what are your goals for Loan Capture next 3 to 5 years? Like, where are you guys going to be?
So actually kind of pulling on the same thread, like what I have found is that I got my start in a proposal, like phase one proposal round. We pulled on like 20 companies. They only signed up with me for phase one. Then we had like a 92% win rate. So I went back to them and was like, hey guys, how about we go after phase two together? And then we had like like 80% win rate on that. Like back in the day, like AFWorks was new, all this was new. And so I've found that like every step along the way, like if we can just nail it and do a really good job for our clients, that opens up more doors. And so I've got some ideas down the road of how we can further expand our services. And eventually, 5, 10, 15 years down the road, maybe it even expands to other industries, that there might be some sort of software play in there. But what I harp with my team all the time is like, we get better at tracking our data. We get better at the client experience. We get better at the strategies that we're building. And that's going to open up more and more doors. So I don't totally know what that 3-year mark looks like down the road. I've got a couple ideas, but I know that as we continue to improve and refine, that opens doors. So I'm really excited for that.
And what percentage do you think Air Force versus Navy versus DARPA or DIU, like how does that break down? Are you very much Air Force centric, or are you finding that SoftWorks and all these different communities, innovation communities?
Yeah, so a lot of our initial traction over the years was through Air Force and Space Force. Again, they're the first doing pitch days and open topics and things like that. But lately, Army's been a fantastic customer for us. And like a client came to us, they already had a little bit of traction through like X-Tech, but they didn't know the program office. They didn't know the customer. And so we were able to go and track that down, and it's been a really good relationship. So all that to say is I'd say Navy's probably weakest, but Air Force, Space Force has been really good for a long time. Army's been really exciting lately, and a couple of cool things going on with SOCOM, special operations as well.
Great. Well, finally, on a personal note, what keeps you motivated and passionate to keep doing this?
Just to be brutally honest, like when I first got out of the Air Force, I did not enjoy my time. I had very not great experiences with leadership, like in multiple jobs, multiple locations, a lot of stories to tell there. Not being allowed to deploy, not being allowed to PCA to a job we agreed was better for my career, all these things. So initially it was like I tried to push innovative ideas. I tried to make the workplace I was in and the processes I was involved with better, and almost always got shut down. So I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder getting out. It's like, I'll prove them like I'm competent, like I can do this. And so like the first couple of years, I think is a little bit more about that. And we've achieved, honestly, I think kind of a surprising amount of success. Like I never thought when I started out with Long Capture, like I didn't think the problem was this big, or that we get as much attention and like people like coming to us, like needing to work with us. So that's really blown me away. But so the transition, like what keeps me going now is like giving my team the opportunity for growth and to empower them to make decisions and give them that upward trajectory as well that will change their lives like my life has been changed. So that's been really cool to kind of make that transition. And now it's like, man, how do I want to grow this because I want to grow them and keep that going. That's what keeps me going now. And that's where I spent a lot of time and thought, can we pay off people's student loans? Can they buy a new car for the first time? Can they afford to send their kids to private school? if that's what they're, they want to do. So a lot of those things are like opening those doors, like that kind of impact that you can create through business. So all this national security and acquisition stuff I talked about, or like changing how the government does business, and then like helping that team grow. That's what's been really cool.
I mean, that's awesome. It's unfortunate you had that experience in the Air Force, but I agree with you. That is taking care of the people and
made the choice to get out and start a company pretty easy. So direct thank you notes.
That's right. Perfect. Well, thank you, Russell. Unfortunately, that's all the time we're gonna have today. But before we wrap up, you mentioned your website. You mentioned some, artifacts folks could jump on. How would they do that?
Yeah, so longcapture.com. There's a whole set of tool pages. If you sign up for a newsletter, we'll be sending invites to some of our upcoming master classes where we get deep dive into some of these different topics and opportunities. And then connect with me on LinkedIn. Yeah, like we're pushing a lot of this content and like videos and all kinds of things out there to help just educate and bring some of these barriers down in this very frustrating and convoluted industry.
That's great. And then to follow on, so if someone wanted to utilize your services, just online, click a link, to bring log capture,
email,
pursue a goal, a dream.
Yeah, so through that website, there's a form submission, sales@longcapture.com, or reaching out to me, Russell Long, on LinkedIn. Any of those will work.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for this opportunity. It's been fun.
Take care.